Let's talk about a war so brutal it brought an entire golden age to its knees. A conflict that pitted Greek against Greek and completely tore their world apart for decades. This was the Peloponnesian War. And today, we're opening up a 2,400-year-old cold case to figure out what exactly went wrong.
So back in 446 BC, the two superpowers of Greece, Athens and Sparta, signed a peace treaty. But this wasn't some confident handshake. It was more like they were just papering over some massive cracks in their relationship. It was supposed to last for 30 years. It didn't even make it 15 before the whole thing just imploded.
So who lit the fuse? Was it the rising star, Athens, ambitious, democratic, with a powerful navy? Or was it the old guard, Sparta, a fearful, rigid military state? Figuring that out is at the heart of our entire investigation today.
All right, so here's our game plan. We're going to look at the real motive behind the war. Then, we'll open the official case file on Athens. We'll even be a fly on the wall for the dramatic trial that sealed Greece's fate. We'll weigh the arguments, and then, well, you're the jury.
You know, lucky for us, we have the best witness you could possibly ask for, Thucydides. He was an Athenian general who actually fought in this war. And he had this really interesting idea. He said that all the official reasons for the war, the broken treaties, all the bickering, that was all just a smokescreen for something much, much deeper.
Here it is, Thucydides' big theory. He called the true cause the prophesis. Think of it as the real, deep-down reason for why something happens. And for him, it really just boiled down to two words: growth and fear. Athens was getting bigger and more powerful, and Sparta, the established top dog, was getting really, really scared. And that fear, Thucydides argued, is what made war a certainty.
And these two, talk about polar opposites. Athens was this messy, bustling democracy, a hub for a giant naval empire built on trade. Sparta, a super strict, closed-off military society focused entirely on land power. They were like oil and water. There was just no way they were going to mix peacefully forever. It was a recipe for disaster.
So if Spartan fear was the slow-burning fire, what were the sparks that actually set off the explosion? Thucydides calls these the aitia, which are basically the last straw moments, the specific complaints that pushed everyone over the edge. And as we open up the case file, you're going to notice a pattern. They all seem to point right at Athens.
First up, Exhibit A, the mess with Corcyra. Corcyra is an island with a massive navy, and it's in a nasty fight with Corinth. Now, you have to remember, Corinth is Sparta's #1 ally at sea. So what does Athens do? It jumps right in, makes an alliance with Corcyra, and sends its own ships to fight Corinth. This was a huge move, a direct poke at Sparta and its allies.
So you gotta ask, was this just a smart defensive play by Athens to get a new powerful fleet on its side? Or was this a deliberate provocation, a way to stick it to Sparta's best friend? Were they protecting themselves, or were they just looking for a fight? Okay, next up, Exhibit B, the Potidaea situation. This city was really stuck between a rock and a hard place. It was technically an Athens empire, but it was originally a Corinthian colony. So Athens, smelling trouble, demands they tear down their walls. Potidaea says no way, revolts, and bam! Athens puts the city under siege. Another direct confrontation with a city loyal to Corinth.
And again, what's the motive here? Is Athens just doing what any empire would do, keeping its subjects in line? Or is this another calculated move to humiliate Corinth and test just how far Sparta is willing to be pushed?
And finally, Exhibit C, the Megarian Decree. This one wasn't about ships or sieges. This was pure economic warfare. Athens just straight up banned its neighbor, Megara, a Spartan ally, from every single port in its massive empire. For Megara's economy, this was a death sentence. It showed everyone that Athens wasn't afraid to use its money as a weapon. So these three events back-to-back, Corcyra, Potidaea, and Megara, pushed Sparta's allies, led by a furious Corinth, to the absolute breaking point. They all march to Sparta, demand a meeting, and call for war. And what happens next is basically a trial that will decide the fate of the entire Greek world.
The Corinthians came in hot. They completely blasted Athens, calling it a tyrant that was enslaving Greece. But then they did something incredibly bold. They turned on Sparta itself and basically called them cowards for just sitting by and letting it all happen. Ouch. That's a dangerous speech to give in Sparta.
And the Athenian response? Wow, it was cold and it was brilliant. They didn't apologize for anything. In fact, they doubled down. The Athenian ambassador pretty much said, "We earned this empire because you Spartans didn't want the job, and we have every right to protect our interests." It was less of a defense and more of a, "what are you going to do about it?" threat.
So after all the arguments, even after a Spartan king urged caution, it all came down to this one guy, an official named Sthenelaitis. He just threw the rule book out. He didn't care about legal arguments. He just gave this short, fiery speech that was all about Spartan pride and demanded they vote for war.
And that was that. The vote wasn't even close. The Spartan assembly roared for war. And in that moment, the 30 Years' Peace was officially dead. The Peloponnesian War was on.
So the decision for war was made. But let's take a deep breath, step away from the heat of the moment, and look at the evidence one last time. On one hand, the case against Athens looked pretty strong. I mean, you can see this clear pattern of aggressive, expansionist behavior. But then you look at Sparta. They sat on their hands for years, while Athens grew stronger, and then they finally acted. But was it out of justice, or just because they were scared and their allies were screaming at them?
And this brings us right back to our man Thucydides. In the end, he says it wasn't really about the speeches or the decrees. He concluded that the Spartans voted for war for one simple reason. They were afraid. It was that deep, underlying fear of Athens' rising power that ultimately cast the fatal vote. All right, we've laid out the whole case. We've looked at the long-term motive and the short-term triggers. We've heard from the prosecution and the defense, and now the jury is you.
So after hearing it all, who do you hold responsible? Was it Athens, the ambitious aggressor that just wouldn't stop pushing? Or was it Sparta, the fearful, established power that lashed out because it couldn't handle the change? It's a question that has echoed through history, and the final verdict? Well, that one's up to you.